Let me tell you something. When a man lets you walk away, most women think that means he didn't care. They think, if I mattered, he would have stopped me. They think, if he loved me, he would have fought. They think, if I was the one, he wouldn't have let me leave. But that's not always the truth. Sometimes a man lets you walk away because he believes you'll come back. Sometimes he lets you walk away because he's comfortable. Sometimes he lets you walk away because he has no idea what he just lost. And sometimes, and this is the part nobody talks about, he doesn't understand your value until your presence is no longer available to him. You see, absence has a way of turning clarity on. Now let's talk about what's really happening behind the silence. He didn't feel the loss when you left, he felt it later. Let me explain something the way Steve Harvey would say it to you straight. A man does not always recognize the value of what he has in the moment it's leaving. That's not because the value wasn't real. It's because familiarity can dull appreciation. When something has been part of your everyday life, your mind starts labeling it as permanent even when it isn't. So when you walked away, he didn't immediately feel heartbreak. He felt normal. And that's the part that confuses so many women. See, in that first phase after you left, nothing in his world had adjusted yet. His routines were still there. His distractions were still there. The same friends, the same work, the same habits. Psychologically, the brain resists change, so it pretends everything is fine before reality has time to settle in. He might have even convinced himself, we just needed space, so it's not that serious. That's not clarity, that's emotional delay. Loss is rarely loud at the beginning. It's quiet. It waits. The real impact doesn't show up at the door when you leave. It shows up days later, in moments that used to belong to both of you. It's when he hears a joke and instinctively thinks to text you. It's when something stressful happens and he reaches for the one person who knew how to calm him down and then realizes that access is gone. That's when absence stops being theoretical and becomes personal. Human beings are wired to notice presence, but we are transformed by absence. When you were there, your support felt natural to him. Your listening ear, your encouragement, your consistency, those things blended in the background of his life. He didn't wake up every day analyzing them. But once they're removed, the emotional structure they created starts collapsing in slow motion. Suddenly, he has to handle things alone that he never consciously realized you were helping him carry. And here's where the shift happens. Memory begins to edit the story. At first, he remembered the disagreements, the pressure, the expectations. But as time passes, the mind does something powerful. It filters out the noise and highlights the meaning. He starts remembering how you showed up, how you believed in him, how you understood him in ways most people didn't even try to. What once felt ordinary now feels rare. That's when the weight hits. Not because you said anything new, not because you argued harder, but because your absence gave him the distance required to finally see what your presence had been doing all along. Regret doesn't usually arrive dramatically. It builds slowly, like realizing a light has been turned off in a room you didn't even know was illuminated by someone else. And once that realization starts, it doesn't easily go away. The mind replays conversations. It revisits decisions. It asks questions that never came up when everything felt secure. The truth is, delayed emotion is still real emotion. Some people just take longer to arrive at it. But here's the part you must understand. His delayed understanding does not mean you were wrong to walk away. Sometimes people only grow aware after they are forced to live without what they underestimated. That lesson belongs to them, not to you. So if it feels like he didn't care when you left, don't confuse delayed realization with lack of feeling. What he's experiencing now is the emotional echo of something he didn't fully value in real time. And echoes, by nature, come after the sound, not during it. Your silence removed the one thing he took for granted access. Let's talk about something most people misunderstand, and this is something Steve Harvey has said in many different ways. People don't always take love for granted, but they do take access for granted. There's a difference. Love is emotional, access is habitual, and habits are dangerous when they go unquestioned. When you were in his life, he had constant access to you. He could call when he wanted, text when it was convenient, reach out when he needed comfort, validation, reassurance, or even just attention. Whether he realized it or not, you became part of the emotional infrastructure of his day-to-day life. Not something he scheduled, something he assumed. That assumption is where complacency lives. See, when someone believes you will always be there, they stop measuring your presence as something valuable and start treating it like something guaranteed. Not because they're intentionally careless, but because human nature adapts quickly to consistency. What was once appreciated becomes expected. What was once special becomes normal. And what becomes normal often gets overlooked. Then one day, that access disappears. No more immediate replies, no more emotional availability, no more knowing you can reach her and she'll be there. And that's when the shift begins, not in his heart first, but in his awareness. Silence is powerful because it interrupts expectation. When there's no argument, no explanation, no chasing, there's nothing for him to react against. Instead, he's left alone with the absence. And absence forces recognition in a way that words never can. Before, he didn't have to think about your role in his life because you were always fulfilling it. Now, every moment that used to include you requires adjustment. He has to sit with things by himself that he used to share. He has to process emotions without your input. He has to face quiet where there used to be connection. And the human brain notices disruption faster than it notices stability. Your silence doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it doesn't argue. But it removes the convenience he unknowingly relied on. That removal creates space for reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable when someone realizes they may have mishandled something meaningful. What makes silence so impactful is that it shifts the dynamic from you trying to be heard and him trying to understand. When you were explaining yourself, he could resist, defend, or dismiss. But when you became unavailable, there was nothing left to push against. The only thing remaining was the question, why is she no longer here the way she used to be? And that question lingers because access once lost is no longer in his control. He can't simply reach out and expect the same response. He can't assume emotional doors are still open. He can't predict you the way he once did. That uncertainty replaces the comfort he had grown used to, and suddenly what felt ordinary now feels significant. This is why silence often speaks louder than repeated effort. Effort can be misread as persistence. Silence is felt as change, and change forces attention. But here's the truth you must hold on to. Your silence is not a strategy to make someone miss you. It's a boundary that protects your value. The effect it has on him is a byproduct, not the purpose. When you removed access, you didn't create confusion. You created clarity. You showed that your presence was not an endless resource. It was something to be respected, reciprocated, and valued or lost. And once someone experiences life without access to what once came so easily, they begin to understand that what they thought was always going to be there was actually a privilege. Distance forced him to meet the version of life that doesn't include you. Here's something people don't realize until it happens to them, and it's a truth often expressed in the straight, talking wisdom of Steve Harvey. Distance doesn't just separate two people. Distance introduces reality. It forces someone to experience life without the role you used to play in it. And that experience can be far more revealing than any conversation you ever had. When you were there, your presence blended into his life in ways he likely never analyzed. You were part of the rhythm. The person he could rely on emotionally, even if he didn't always acknowledge it. You added balance to his world through encouragement, understanding, companionship, and the subtle ways you made life smoother. But because those contributions were consistent, they became invisible. Familiarity has a way of disguising importance. Then you created distance, and suddenly he had to face a version of life that didn't include you in it. At first, that version might have seemed manageable. He could distract himself, stay busy, tell himself nothing had really changed. But distance doesn't just remove a person physically, it removes their influence, their energy, their support. Over time, he begins to notice that certain moments don't feel the same. Achievements feel less meaningful when there's no one who understands the journey behind them. Challenges feel heavier when there's no one offering reassurance. Even ordinary days carry a different emotional tone. That's because what you brought to his life wasn't just presence, it was connection. Distance forces comparison. He begins to compare how things feel now to how they felt when you were there, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small realizations. He notices conversations that lack depth. He notices that the comfort he once had isn't easily replaced. He notices that peace, when it's gone, is hard to recreate. And that's when understanding begins to grow. Because when someone is no longer part of your daily experience, you can't rely on habit to define how you feel about them. You have to actually evaluate what their absence means. You have to confront whether life feels fuller, emptier, or simply different. Distance removes distraction and replaces it with reflection. This reflection isn't something you forced, it's something reality introduced. He's no longer reacting to you emotionally in real time. Instead, he's encountering the echo of what used to be there. The laughter that's missing, the support that isn't automatic anymore, the familiarity that once grounded him. And when those things are gone, he's left to ask himself questions he may have avoided before. Did she make my life better? Did I appreciate that while I had it? Why does everything feel slightly off now? Distance doesn't answer those questions. It makes them unavoidable. And the longer that distance exists, the clearer those answers tend to become. Because time strips away ego. It removes defensiveness. It takes away the ability to blame circumstances or arguments. All that's left is experience, life as it is now, compared to life as it was. That contrast is powerful. But here's the part that matters most for you to understand. Distance was never about making him realize something. It was about you choosing not to remain where you were undervalued. Whatever realization he reaches belongs to his journey, not yours. Distance didn't just change what he sees. It changed what you accepted. And sometimes the most profound clarity people gain comes not when someone stays and keeps trying, but when they are finally forced to live without the very presence they once assumed would always remain. Men often process love backwards. One of the hardest truths to understand, and something often explained with blunt honesty by Steve Harvey, is that men and women frequently process love in completely different sequences. It's not that one feels more or the other feels less. It's that the order is different. And that difference in timing can create confusion, frustration, and heartbreak when it's misunderstood. Many women experience connection emotionally first. They feel the bond, the closeness, the meaning of the relationship, and then they evaluate whether it makes sense logically. They know it matters because they feel it matter. But for many men, the process often starts in reverse. They understand things mentally before they fully feel them emotionally. They analyze the relationship through comfort, compatibility, routine, and stability long before they sit with the depth of what that connection actually means to them. While you were present, he may have thought about the relationship in practical terms. He knew you were there. He knew you cared. He knew the role you played in his life. But knowing is not the same as emotionally absorbing. Because your presence was consistent, he didn't have to confront how important it was. There was no urgency pushing him to examine his feelings on a deeper level. Everything functioned, so he stayed in the mental space of assumption rather than emotional awareness. Then the relationship changed. When you walked away, the logical structure remained, but the emotional reality finally had room to catch up. Without your daily presence, without your voice, without the familiar rhythm of having you there, he could no longer rely on understanding things intellectually. He had to experience them. And experience is what triggers emotional recognition. That's why it can seem like his realization came late. It didn't come late to him. It came in the order his mind and heart processed things. First comes the adjustment. She's not here. Then comes the observation. Things feel different. Only after that comes the emotional question. Why does this matter so much? Emotions that are delayed can sometimes feel stronger because they arrive all at once without distraction. When you were together, there were conversations, routines, and even disagreements that kept life moving quickly. After the separation, there is space. And space forces reflection. Reflection opens the door to feelings that had been sitting quietly in the background all along. He begins to remember moments he didn't pause to appreciate before. He starts recognizing the emotional safety you provided, the understanding you offered, the way you showed up. These realizations are not new creations, they are delayed recognitions. The feelings were always forming. He just didn't slow down enough to notice them while you were there. This backward processing can create one of the most painful mismatches in relationships. One person is responding emotionally in real time, while the other doesn't fully grasp the emotional weight until later. It's not intentional neglect, it's delayed awareness. But delay still has consequences because by the time realization arrives, the situation has already changed. And here is where the lesson becomes important for you. His timeline of understanding does not define your timeline of healing. Just because he processes love later does not mean you must wait for that process to finish. Growth sometimes happens apart, not together. Awareness sometimes comes after loss, not before it. When people process emotions backward, they often learn through absence what they didn't learn through presence. But that lesson belongs to them to carry, not you to pause your life for. So if it seems like he understands now what he couldn't understand then, it's because some realizations only arrive when the comfort that delayed them is gone. And by the time those realizations finally surface, you may have already learned the forward moving truth that your worth was never meant to be recognized late. It was meant to be valued all along. Walking away shifted the power back to self-respect, and that changes how you are remembered. There comes a moment in every situation where continuing to stay no longer proves love, it starts to cost dignity. And one of the strongest messages often echoed in the no-nonsense style of Steve Harvey is this: when you choose self-respect over chasing validation, you don't lose power, you reclaim it. Walking away was not an act of weakness. It was a decision to stop negotiating your worth in a place where it wasn't being fully honored. When you were still trying to make it work, your energy was focused outward. You were explaining, hoping, adjusting, and waiting for change. In that position, your value could be overlooked because it felt like you would continue to give, continue to stay, continue to try no matter what. Effort, when it is constant and unreciprocated, can be misread as something that will never run out. That's not because your effort wasn't meaningful. It's because it became predictable. But the moment you walked away, the dynamic shifted. You stopped probing. You stopped convincing. You stopped asking to be chosen. And in doing so, you changed how you would be remembered. People often don't reflect deeply on someone who keeps returning despite disappointment, but they do remember the person who knew when to leave. Because walking away introduces a boundary, and boundaries communicate value more clearly than words ever can. It tells the other person that your presence was not automatic. It was intentional, and once removed, it cannot be assumed back into existence. That kind of exit creates a lasting impression. Not one of anger or drama, but a strength. You are no longer remembered as someone who stayed through everything. You are remembered as someone who recognized their limit and honored it. That changes the emotional narrative entirely. Instead of recalling arguments or tension, he begins to associate you with the realization that he lost access to someone who carried themselves with quiet confidence. Self-respect has a way of reframing memory. Now, when he thinks of you, he doesn't see someone who begged for attention. He sees someone who valued themselves enough to step away. That distinction matters because people tend to reflect more deeply on what they couldn't control than on what they could. Your departure was no longer something he directed. It was something he had to respond to. And that loss of control forces a different kind of reflection. More importantly, walking away didn't just change how he sees you. It changed how you see yourself. You proved to yourself that your worth is not dependent on someone else's recognition. You demonstrated that love should not require abandoning your own standards. And once you experience that shift internally, you carry yourself differently. You speak differently. You accept differently. You no longer operate from fear of losing someone. You operate from understanding that the right connection will never require you to lose yourself. That internal transformation is the real power. Whether he realizes what he lost or not becomes secondary, because your decision was never truly about making him understand. It was about you refusing to remain where your value had to be explained. Walking away didn't erase what you shared. It clarified what you deserved. And in the end, people are remembered not only for how they loved, but for how they honored themselves. By choosing self-respect,